Welcome to another edition of the NAIC Insights series. I'm your host, Bob Greene, and I am delighted to be joined today by Christopher Ailman, Chief Investment Officer for the California State Teachers Retirement System. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Bob. Good to be here. I apologize. We had to do this a second time, but thank you for the people that signed in again.
Now, we're grateful that you would do it, given so much that's going on in the world. So, Chris, you and I have known each other for many years, worked together closely over that period of time. Tell us a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of the Chief Investment Officer for CalSTRS.
You know, it's an interesting role, and it's evolved, obviously, in the 20 years I've been here. It started, we were a big fund when I started at 100 billion. Now at 350, though, the portfolio has gotten immensely more complex. And I think a big part of the job is communication. It's leadership and management, like any C-suite kind of job. The staff's gotten much bigger. We do a lot of internal management. But boy, the communication between I always say the CIO is kind of in a sandwich, Bob, managing up to a board, sometimes just 5 people, sometimes as much as 12, like me, but also managing down to a staff. And in that, and then above in the sandwich, above you, you also have stakeholders. So communication plays a giant role in that. We are the board's money manager. This is their trust fund. Our job is to just simply implement it and manage it, give them recommendations and advice. But, we're literally in that role of, as the CIO, of finding out what's their liabilities, what's their risk tolerance, what are their objectives, and then implementing the best darn portfolio we can at the lowest cost possible. But that also means using internal resources and external. So interacting with a lot of external money managers. And Bob, what's unique about STRS, being teachers, and they said this to me 25 years ago when I got here, we want you to make a healthy return, but you have to do it in a really nice way that doesn't hurt anybody. And along the way, they added, oh, and by the way, solve climate change, expand diversity, change the face of Wall Street, and then just deal with a lot of different social issues that create stress. And I have to always come back to them and say, okay, I agree that's a huge problem, but how do you want me to address it from an investment standpoint? Because first and foremost, I've got to make that 7% return. If I don't do that, I'm not doing my job.
Chris, a lot of people, particularly on the asset manager side, don't focus specifically on that all-important assumed rate of return. Talk a little bit about assumed rate of return, and then the whole sort of pivot around what happens if you don't. What does that cause? What does that trigger around state government? Talk a little bit about assumed rate of return and the role it plays in everything else you do.
For us, Bob, it's absolutely paramount. So I'm going to relate this to individuals. Think about your own 401k. You have to put money away, and if you do the math to figure out how much you think you're going to need in retirement, you have to assume a rate of return. Well, you're not going to assume you're going to generate 10 or 20% every year. So it's got to be realistic. And then you figure out how much money you got to put away, that time value of money. For us, because we're a perpetual 401k, there's a new teacher starting next September, just as much as there's one retiring this June. So we always have that 30-year horizon. That 7% really is the math formula at the center of what we do, because it sets the contribution rates the teachers have. As a defined benefit, it's exactly that. The benefit's already in stone. It's carved in stone. It's designed. So the only questions are, what's the teacher's salary? Because that's going to determine that benefit, how long they teach, and then how long they live after they teach. My job is to take the money they put in. So it's a fixed amount they have to put in out of their paycheck. I've got to triple that over 30 years so that there's enough money for them when they retire. Right? Just getting in the elevator today, I was surprised to see we flash up on our information screens 437 over 100 years old that are getting a CalSTRS pension. So the CalSTRS teachers, when they retire, they live longer than any other workforce. But that means I really got to earn that 7%. So to answer your question succinctly, if I don't earn the 7, the contribution rates for current teachers go up. Not the ones that retired, they're set, but the ones that are starting now. And so there's an intergenerational challenge there of I've got to earn this over a long time period, year in and year out, as best we can on average, so that we can balance the cost of a new teacher and an older teacher. And then what's amazing about teachers, they're all college educated, 72% are female. They're very future focused. When you think about it, they're spending their time, they're investing their life in teaching the next generation. So while they generally don't ask a lot of financial questions, they're so focused in on the classroom and those kids, and they think about the future. And what they tell us is, hey, I'm going to contribute my life because I know I don't get paid that great. I'm going to contribute my life to bettering society. But you better be there when I want to retire because then I want to go enjoy life. And we get amazing stories from the retirees of their travel, and the amount they give back is just amazing to society. But my job's to make sure they get there. They got that pension check, and it doesn't cost the current teachers and the school districts that much money because if they got to pay it in payroll, then it's coming out of textbooks and school facilities and out of the taxpayers' pockets. So I mean, to me, you really see the social value of a defined benefit and the pressure on us to produce results.
Chris, a lot of people, when they think about government, they think about chief executives, they think about governors, they think about mayors, they think about presidents. But the reality is, those jobs don't affect everybody every day, right? They don't affect all of the stakeholders every day. They're hugely important jobs, and I won't diminish it here. But there isn't a community within the state of California that doesn't have teachers, and those teachers are all exposed to the decisions and the impact of your leadership. Talk about the weight of responsibility that you felt over the years in terms of delivering for them.
It is huge, but I got to say, Bob, I sleep like a baby when I think about that. I wake up every 2 hours and scream. It is a heavy weight. It's a big state, and we all know teachers. I grew up in Southern California, in LA. I went to public school from kindergarten all the way up to even college. And I was part of the LA Unified School District. So when I think about the people we work for, I think back to my swim coach, Bernie Sanders, and Denny Holt, and some of the teachers back then. And I realized, you're right. It touches a lot of people. We all know a teacher, and then it's amazing. I've got 3 teachers in my family. My daughter's a teacher in our system. My sister and my sister-in-law are retirees. So it connects. It's a heavy responsibility. It is every day, and the difference I think with some of the positions you mentioned, they're elected. They're generally going to be in there for 4 to 8 years. Um,
Mhm.
when I can't took this job, I promised, well, not promised. I told the board my intention was to outserve the longest CIO they had at the time, which was 13 years. And
Mhm.
my mind, I thought I'd be here 15 years, but here I am 24 years later. I have been very fortunate, but these jobs are heavy. I remember running the state of Washington and flying back into Seattle and kind of thinking, wow, I'm responsible for all these people in the state. You feel the weight and you feel the responsibility. The hardest days in this job are when the markets drop and you're losing other people's money.
Yeah.
I think, when we talk to the staff, the people that aren't bothered by that, we don't want them to work here. You've got to have a sense of being a fiduciary. I got to put their money first ahead of mine and think of them primarily before I think of myself.
So, Chris, let's go back. You obviously are, if not the longest tenured, one of the longest tenured CIOs. Unfortunately, you always get to carry that second largest in size pension plan. I think you wear it well, but
Thank you.
in a long list of pension plans, there's a bigger one across the river from you. But talk to us a little bit about your prior experience And in particular, focus on the things that most prepared you for the unique challenges of being CIO.
Bob, great question. I got lucky in that I came out of college. The term CIO didn't really exist, and these pensions were just shifting from a legal list to a prudent investment professional. So they were building staffs. So literally all the way back in the mid 1980s, I got hired as a financial analyst for a county pension plan and the county treasurer. We morphed the title over eventually to CIO, but that's what the job was. So I got there. They were debating, how much do we put in real estate? Real estate is an alternative asset.
Yeah.
Non-US was a different asset. Non-US equity was a different asset class. So I got lucky in that I've been a CIO since then in that role. I grew with the funds. I grew with the sophistication. I went from a $3 billion plan to a 30. That plan grew to 60, came to STRS at 100 and grew to 300. So nowadays it's a different challenge for young people starting in the industry. I still think these are very worthwhile jobs because of the work-life balance it affords you. But I'm saddened by the turnover that the CIO gets. You tease me about being number two. I've been fortunate. I'm honest with PERS. We benefit by the fact that they catch a lot of attention and flack, some of it well deserved. But sometimes it's okay to be right behind them in the shadow. And we are right across the river. The funny story is since I'm actually a public employee, California is very different. All the investment officers are actually civil servants, not exempt like they should be. So
Mhm.
as a state employee, my pension, because I only cover STRS only covers the teachers, my pension's actually across the river over there with CalPERS. That said, you know, whatever, New York, Boston, um, in California, it's, Rams versus 49ers or Dodgers, Giants, whatever rivalry you want to pick. We're across the river from each other. We're rivals, and I want to beat them every chance I get, but not too badly, as my staff says. So my growth pattern has been fortunate to be at the right place and grow with this industry, which has been a blessing. I think younger people starting up have to decide, do they want to start in a small shop or do they want to go to a large firm? And the value of a small shop is you get to be the jack of all trades, kind of master of none, exposure to a lot of things. I got exposed to municipal bond issuance, defined benefit, defined contribution, all kinds of different liability pools that prepared me for the difference between running an insurance company versus running a defined benefit plan.
Very good. So, as you think about the pipeline, you've been in this business a long time, and as you think about the pipeline, what advice would you give beyond the advice you just gave? But what advice would you give to women and diverse professionals that might want to get into ultimately becoming a CIO and managing large pools of assets in the public sector?
I'm a fan of the public sector, and I think there's a huge opportunity to start here and launch yourself. I remember back in the year 2000, I interviewed with a fund and they asked me, "Are you going to use this as a stepping stone?" And I said, "Really?" But they had that. People had come, stayed for about 4 years, and moved on or back to the private sector. That's okay. I think a lot of funds are used to that, and I frankly think that the public funds are much more comfortable and actively seeking diversity. Sure, the jobs don't pay as well. You're going to be in Salem, Oregon, or Sacramento instead of
Mhm.
New York or Boston or LA, San Francisco, but it can catapult you, especially in private equity. Now they teach it at universities, but before you couldn't even get a private equity background. So I'm still going to advocate for that. Not a lot of people do come into our world, but I'm thrilled at how the doors are opening. When I started, everything was run out of New York City, and
Good.
Manhattan is not diverse in the financial services sector. They all recruit out of the Ivy League schools, which are not diverse. Thankfully,
Mhm.
now we realize you can run money in Chicago, you can run it in LA, you can run it in Newport Beach. There's even a really wise investment person I know in Omaha, Nebraska. So you can run money anywhere. And I think we certainly have woken up, but I think the world's waking up. You don't have to come out of Harvard, Yale, or some Ivy League to be good at managing money. You can actually be born anywhere, any race, any ethnicity, any language, and actually be very good at managing money. And you can do it now, thankfully, with all kinds of tools anywhere in the world. So I'm glad we're finally breaking away. And what I always saw, Bob, growing up in California, Wall Street was so far away. It was not visible to me. Nothing on TV that I watched, was about Wall Street. And unfortunately, just even as my kids are growing up, my daughters saw Wall Street as this horrible, evil place because they saw movies about it. It was terrible. And I kept saying it's not like that. So
Yeah.
I think as we get more and more examples, and that's one of the reasons I try to bring people onto Bloomberg or CNBC, is we need to show different faces, different people, and show that as a career path. When we, like, we go to work with NASP in the LA area, they do some amazing work with their fast track program.
Mhm.
It's trying to reach kids who can see the tall buildings of LA but never get to go there and realize, okay, there's actually a career here and an opportunity. And they see not people like me, but people who are different and realize, okay, maybe I can work in that field. And I think that's the way we've got to break it down. California certainly is diverse and gets it, but you hit it on the head. It's a pipeline all the way from elementary, in my opinion, but definitely high school into college, into master's programs, and into the money management and the fund business.
Yeah, so Chris, I want to dive in on the asset allocation side and kind of talk a little bit. It won't be too technical, certainly not too technical for you. Maybe I'll swim in water above my head a little bit. But looking at the asset classes, we went from this notion of a 60-40 or a 70-30, equity portfolio versus a fixed income portfolio, and that worked, and we did that for probably many years in your career. And now we've gotten into this notion of alternatives, right? So we call everything that's not one of those two alternatives. Talk a little bit about the role that asset allocation plays in the work you do and how it's evolved over the years.
Uh, First on the word alternative, that's funny because just last week I was teasing somebody that we still call private equity and real estate alternative. We've been in those industries for 30 years. Like, come on, 30 years. It's pretty well established.
Right.
Um, Asset allocation is the starting point. It is the whole key. You hit it on the head. If it's in field turn, I still find it's somewhere in the high 80s to 90s. The minute the board asks me about, well, gee, why did Chicago teachers beat us? Or, why did state of Washington beat us? I tell them right away, look at the asset allocation first and foremost. Then we can peel back to the Magnificent Seven or something like that, or value versus growth. But it is the driver. Um, I often say, Bob, that my job is I'm the captain of a big cruise ship, huge cruise ship. We're out in the ocean. We're always out in the ocean because we have a 30-year horizon. And as soon as we approach it, the horizon moves out. The
Mhm.
spot that I'm aiming for is that asset allocation. It's guided by the 7% return the board has to make. And again, that comes from the actuaries. And that starts from the benefits that then define what we have to shoot for. So we shoot for that. And then the board has to really meet and we talk with them and educate them on what is the right asset mix, how much risk. We know we got to take risk to earn seven. How can we diversify that risk? And what kinds of things can diversify that? So it really is critical. We pay a ton of attention to it. It's actually something I look at almost daily. We don't make, it's like ship. We don't make those kinds of small corrections. But I'm trying to look out on the horizon and look for big risks and even then we can't go to harbor. We can't go to cash. We're invested. So all we can do is make subtle course corrections, move up and down within those asset allocation ranges. And you're right, it's gotten more complex. Even though our benchmark is actually a 70-30, pretty
Mhm.
simple, but that's the way the board measures it. But we know by making long-term investments like private equity, like real estate, like infrastructure. With the basket, we can actually do better than the simple 70/30 and all that volatility. If we have a 30-year horizon, we don't need a bunch of daily price securities. I don't need daily liquidity. So I can get benefits by being a longer term investor. But that's where you got to keep your eyes on the ball and really trying to understand. 2008 taught everybody a hard lesson that correlations are not static. They quickly approach one in a crisis. And so even things you thought like fixed income that were going to help you or corporate bonds that were going to help you and diversify away from equity suddenly look just like equity. So it's the recognition that while asset allocation is your roadmap, you're still jumping into the future and you don't quite know what's ahead of you. So you've got to make those changes. But I'm just amazed at the number of securities that Wall Street creates. We get questions about crypto. I've even gotten questions lately about old masters paintings. That's not an asset class. I'm not going there. But it's interesting how the world's evolved and challenged us.
So, Chris, when you look at priorities, you mentioned in the very beginning that the board gives you a primary challenge or objective, which is hitting the 7% assumed rate of return over the long term. But you also mentioned other things, and I've heard you speak prolifically about climate. I've heard you speak prolifically about diversity, particularly around women, but also around diverse managers. Talk about at any given time the set of key priorities that you hold top of mind, and then let's dissect each one of those and what the board is trying to achieve there.
Okay. Whenever you lead a team, you want to keep your instructions pretty darn clear, especially if it's a big team like ours, over 200. Um, I wish I had just one objective, but we do have a basket. First and foremost, earn seven. And that's an absolute seven, which is kind of different than the way most people think. Second, since I can't control the economy, I get them focused on relative returns. Get the best you can out of your asset class. So add alpha to your asset class. But then right behind that is going to be one, our big theme is we care about net zero and climate change. So make investments that reduce our carbon or help the world gases. Number two, try to change the face of Wall Street and expand diversity, inclusion, and equity, and try to actually do some good for society in that area. And then the last thing, which wraps all together, is try to keep a lid on costs because as a big plan, it gets really expensive. And if we can save a dollar on costs and get the same return, that's alpha. So it is a lot. And it is a lot to ask. And I constantly have to go back to the board and say, hey, let's just say we solved climate change. That would be great. But if we don't earn seven, we've actually failed in our job. Great, we win a Nobel Prize, but we're all fired because we didn't make 7%. The teachers are paying more. And, the teachers can't pay a higher price, and maybe some would like to pay personally more to solve climate change or expand diversity. But out of a million members, there's a lot of points of view. So and the way sometimes I do get pushback from the staff, Bob, that it's like, hey, I can't do all this. And my point to them is, the amazing athletes or superstars we see, yes, they do their sport or their art really, really well. But the reason they're single names, and household names is because they do it in the face of adversity. And, we think I try to avoid sports, but I'll use sports. It was awesome that Michael Jordan could hit 3-point shots from everywhere or dunk from everywhere. But what made him awesome is he could do it in the fourth quarter at the buzzer with, somebody Stockton hanging on him, or Tiger Woods making a putt with everybody in the world watching it at the critical time. It's the people that can pull that off and do that with a lot of pressure And I think my staff can rise up and do that. Now, you and I have had some pretty tough discussions because there are times where we haven't been able, we've missed the shot. We haven't done as well. And you got people like you who hold us accountable. I didn't run away. You and I had face to face discussions because I knew it would make me better. And that's what I want to hear. Iron sharpens iron. And I want this team to be superstars. And so we have to listen to people that, want to hold us accountable. And I think we can pull it all off.
So let's dive in on that point around diversity. Obviously, NAIC and the other groups that are out there are self-interested in diversity. We believe that there's a lot that can be done and should be done. But of course, we believe that, right? We're paid to believe it, but we also, represent that constituency. Talk about, I guess, from the starting level, highest possible level. Uh, CalSTRS interest in diversity. What does it want to see? And that sort of euphemistic notion you've used of change the face of Wall Street, change it to what and why?
I think first and foremost, for CalSTRS, it's because our membership is diverse. We are live in a diverse area, so we recognize takes all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of experiences to navigate investments and life. And we're as a group shocked at how Wall Street is not diverse. Like I said, it almost gets back to just simply going to the same colleges. And I watched a show last night where they bragged that they only recruited from one college. And I'm like, how narrow-minded. Everybody had the same
Mhm.
professor in accounting, or everybody had the same math professor. We've learned the hard lesson. I think, Bob, that what's core to CalSTRS, and it's been true before I got here, so back all the way to the 80s, is the recognition that you need lots of people in the room and have different points of view, and that makes better decisions. So I use it as a description of groupthink. And I've said the joke before at some of your conferences. Do we think the outcome might have been different if instead of Lehman Brothers, it was Lehman Sisters, or better yet,
Mhm.
Lehman family?
Mhm.
I went to Harvard one time to get to do a spot lecture, and they were had the uh, exhibit in their library of the history of Lehman Brothers, and was awestruck by how consistently pale, male, and stale the leadership of Lehman Brothers was for almost 100 years. So it was almost destined that they were going to trip over the same log because they all came from the same schools. They all had the same background. They all thought alike. And no one was there to ask a different question. And nowadays, with the world being so global, no one would think twice about investing in China unless they had somebody that speaks Chinese, or better yet, is in China. You're not going to invest in the emerging markets without having some people understand and be on the ground. And like I said, you don't have to be in Manhattan, even though everybody loves it. You don't have to be in Manhattan to make good money. And like I said, there's even some old people in Omaha, Nebraska that seem pretty darn good at it, maybe even better than Manhattan. So I think we get it. I think California has always embraced it. I love the fact that Jackie Robinson played at UCLA and just was watching that movie. I'm so horrified at the experience he had in the East Coast, but it's like, wow, it's just night and day. And having grown up out here, I get it. So to us, it's just part of common sense. Is the best way I can put it to you. Is we need a group of people around us. We need people that are thinking differently and asking the tough questions. And we now realize that that is not. I use the expression "change the face" because it's simple for people to understand.
Mhm.
But the reality is, it's more than diversity is more than skin deep, and we now understand that more than ever. It is all kinds of issues. Just and you need to then bring people with different backgrounds, different educations, different life experiences, different ages in, and you have them make a decision. You're still going to run the risk of having, a financial collapse like Lehman. But somebody's going to ask the question of, gee, we've been 8-to-1 leverage for 150 years. Why are we going to 40-to-1 leverage now? Are we sure this is the right thing? And hopefully somebody's going to ask those kind of questions. And I see that here on my team. You know, get back to the simple point of people with really different personalities. They ask different questions and they think live differently. And in investments, we have to really think about now just not the first-hand exposure, but the second-hand and third-hand exposure risk to really understand an investment. Because especially when you make long-term investments that are going to be around for a decade, that's hard. You're predicting the future, and no one can. So sorry to say a long-winded answer, Bob, but I think it tells us, and I will constantly make the case. Forget these silly court cases. This isn't about preferences. This is about a smart way to do business, that you need people, different thoughts from different schools to ask tough questions to make a better decision. This is all about making better decisions about the future, which no one can predict. So therefore you need all the people you can.
So, Chris, this is your interview, not Bob's opinion column. So I'll ask you the question: have you accomplished in diversity what you have set out to achieve?
No. And we've made some ground, no question. And Bob, I think, there's I don't know, a word picture or a story people tell of somebody who goes to a beach and sees the beach lined with jellyfish that have washed up on shore and starts picking them up and throwing them back. And somebody says, "What are you doing? You're not going to make a difference." And it's like, well, I made a difference for that one. That's kind of how I feel. Have I changed the face of Wall Street by my efforts? Not nearly enough. I've made a dent. We've made a dent because I think what I've done is at least built a culture here of absolute diversity, and I am so proud of this team, but also a platform that people want to then push diversity out and ask the questions. And that culture has, I hope, a legacy. So, I just got off a call with the Twigo Foundation. Those alums are just amazing. They're millionaires now. They're richer than me. That's really cool. So,
Mhm.
having been part of things for a while, you can see the fruition of that work. Are we far enough along? No way. When I look at MBA programs, white, white, male, and they're not stale, they're young, but pale and male. We've got to get more diversity in coming up from junior high. I can tell you a personal experience, Bob. My daughter, I have three daughters. One
Mhm.
was a math major. She was one of two girls in her high school advanced math class. So yeah, she felt different. But what really shocked me was that her girlfriends were the ones giving her pressure of, why are you in that class? Why aren't you in, I don't know what it was, but some other class with us?
Mhm.
And it was just like, wow, society is crushing in how we go back to norms. So, uh, but to answer your question succinctly, no, I haven't. I've made a little dip in the pond. Hopefully that creates some ripples, and hopefully that carries on. But I'm not going to give up. I'm not done. I'm just gonna, I'll stop being CIO, but I'm gonna have a bit of an encore career and do what I can. One of the things that I love to do is mentor people. I've had a lot of mentors, whether it's formal or informal, and I love teaching. So I get the chance to talk to classes at a lot of different universities. Our intern program here, I'm still going to spend the summer coming back and teaching our little intern pool. And I am so proud at how diverse that pool is. And I'm convinced someday some of them, only about half come to STRS. The other half go into the industry. But I really am convinced some of them are going to be the superstars we see in the industry. And that would make me so proud.
So, Chris, I appreciate the candor and the extent of the answer. And if the answer, as you stated, is no, what have the obstacles and impediments been, right? I mean, this is a large, powerful organization, very smart people, committed and experienced, talented leader. You guys do drive the market in many directions. You can use direct authority, you can use influence, but you must have faced some pretty steep obstacles. What have those obstacles been? and how have you tried to work around them?
Well, number one was certainly Prop 209 in California was having the laws say what you can or can't measure because what you measure gets managed. And
Mhm.
if I could have measured that, it would have been easier to manage it. We're still struggling with it. You ask us those questions, other people do. And I think the hard thing is alpha is hard for anybody. I tried to say that before and I didn't come out right, but alpha is hard regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, background, education, location, anything everywhere. Starting a new firm is hard. Not many firms, when you start, survive. So I think it's a recognition that we need managers of all types. I've had some people. My One of my favorite phrases. We have an award named after a local California legislator who said at a platform that her job was to throw bricks at me, and I was the speaker right after her. So I had to laugh and say, "Well, I guess my job is to catch those bricks and build a road and make something good out of it." And that's okay. I understood that. Like you said, we understand people's backgrounds and where they're coming from, and bless God bless their passion. So, yes, I've had some obstacles. We're a governmental pension plan, which means we use RFPs. Same request for proposals that the transportation department uses to bid out freeways or buy cement. Same one that Department of Motor Vehicles uses to buy pencils. These are professional services. It's silly. So running a money manager inside a governmental entity has been hard, and rules have gotten in the way. But I have learned over the years where it can bend and how you can do things creatively, what you can do well, what you should avoid doing. Does Obviously, you and I know we have not been perfect. Many people will criticize us that we have not pushed hard enough and far enough. My board's very, very focused and asking those same kind of tough questions now of like, wow, why do you have that manager versus you could have had this manager? It's hard. Hindsight's, 2020. I point out if you have laser vision, hindsight can be 1520. But the staff is recognizing and knows we want to find diverse managers and go tap into them. The industry organizations you mentioned have been a huge help in making sure managers get visibility. But as a big giant fund, I can't hire a bunch of first time managers. I need to hire a whole mixture of big established firms, small firms, and I'm pushing those big established firms to be better at expanding their diversity. And frankly, they need to do a lot more. So, of the challenges, it's the governmental business structure that's been the hardest, and then the rules and regulations in California. As you know, for years and years, all we could say is the word emerging, which only means small first timers. You can only hire so many first time managers to run money, and you're not can't give them a ton right away. So now we can finally say the word diversity. We can measure it, and we can manage that. And I can put the challenge on other firms, which is, and I've had those tough discussions. If the owner of a firm, let's say it's privately held, and the owner of the firm is diverse, well, what about everybody else? And who's making decisions? What about all the people that are making decisions? Let's have an honest face-to-face discussion throughout everything of what diversity means, what are they embracing it? And nowadays, what's changed, and I keep saying this to the board, we've been at diversity since I got here in 2000, but really now what we're trying to understand is inclusion. How do you measure inclusion in an investment decision? Because you're not going to have your interns from college chiming in about whether to do a deal. You want to hear from them, you want them to be involved, but how do we measure inclusion in the investment management industry? How do we measure equity?
Mhm.
Because compensation has always been a big secret in our business, but those are
Yeah.
really important things to us, and I think now we can finally have those honest discussions with people. I'm getting some pushback again from the courts and from some other states that we can't ask those questions. It's like, if I can't ask the question, I don't have the information. How do I do this better?
Yeah. Chris, one of the things that has evolved over your time in the job is the notion of billion-dollar diverse managers, $10 billion diverse managers, $50 billion diverse managers. As the number of diverse managers has grown, as their assets under management have grown, as their track records have grown, has CalSTRS been able to lean into that? And if not, if so, talk about that. If not, why not?
I'll be honest, not enough, because our programs are focused on emerging,
Yeah,
which meant small and new. And I've had some good discussions with John Rogers, and Melanie Hobson was a guest speaker at our board retreat. And she, I mean, obviously an incredibly awesome person,
sure.
but an awesome speaker to really nail it for the board. Now that I can say diverse, I think we're making a rebuckled effort. You're going to see from my staff coming out, just even spill the beans at our May meeting in our November. This whole mid part of our fiscal year has been a focus on DE&I. We have two big work projects every year, and the board picked last year DE&I. So we had an external industry panel in November, and we had internal manager panel in January. We're going to come back in May with a new long-term business plan that's going to focus in exactly on that point. Why haven't we shifted right away to a diverse manager? It's the challenge of, if you have a global equity manager, let's say a US growth manager, you know, you look at the two growth managers, just because one's beating the other for the last couple of years, is that just because they were in the Magnificent Seven and the other wasn't enough, or what? So it's, in our size accounts, it is very expensive to switch managers. That does not mean we can't start funding that new manager. And oh, by the way, we believe in particularly in global equity, we believe in the efficiency of markets. So we don't have a lot of large cap growth and value. We have a lot of small cap. But I'm going to constantly challenge the team that when they look at their pool of managers and let's say they're losing confidence. We just had a portfolio manager retire on we had a manager for 25 years, and the PM is going to retire who runs it. And they're just not really that confident in the succession plan at this firm. It's like, well, then great. Let's rebuckle our effort to make sure that in our pool are diverse managers and that we're thinking about that. Because now it's back to my point. I can measure it, we can manage it.
Mhm.
If you can't measure it, it's so hard to know what to do and what are we improving or decreasing. And you guys hold us accountable. You ask us the tough questions. So I think you're going to see, the Illinois funds certainly blazed this trail and done an excellent job. And last time, I saw you in person, time before that, we were in Chicago. And part of the reason I went there is to learn from those funds. They're smaller than me, but they've done it better. So what are they doing that we can learn from it? And that was one of the big key things. They had a definition from the legislature of diversity, so they could measure it, they could manage it. I wasn't allowed to use those words here in California, but now I am, so we will. And you're going to see a new business plan from us. It's not just words, we are going to live it. We've had a long-term business plan on diversity since 2005, I think was my first one. And this time, we're going to need to re-up it. And I want to leave that as a legacy for the new CIO. And I know the board's going to be pushing of, here's your plan, now go execute it and measure it and report out on what you're doing. Because reporting that sunshine is is very transparent, and we have to stand up. And investment people are competitive. They don't want to look bad, so they will push and try. And you're right, there's some big existing firms that are really pushing the envelope, and we should do business with them.
Chris, there are those, even on my board, that were surprised that I could get a 1 hour open-ended interview with you. And I have to say, I might have been surprised a bit myself. If you Google your name and my name, something comes up that should have put, I guess two people could have potentially found themselves at a crossroads of not wanting to work together. I'll leave it to the audience to go Google it, but I will commend you for your stature, for your composure, for your leadership, and for your character. You and I
Thank
have disagreed on a narrow set of deep issues, but we did find ourselves in disagreement there. Um,
you.
Whatever you'd like to say about that, I'd welcome those remarks. If you want to explain what you were saying, or if you want to give a reaction to our reaction, I'd like to give you the opportunity and the space now to do that.
Thanks, Bob. First and foremost, now you realize it's going to go right back to the top of the search results. I think we had buried it.
We had.
Um, I think the thing I would say, you were right. And it was hard for me to say that when we talked on the phone. I remember where I was standing. I was at Stanford University, and we finally connected. Joe helped bring us together, and I said, you're right. What I said, and it was a reporter who I won't even talk to anymore, and all the people know that. I don't
Yeah.
think he works in our industry. He probably covers autos or something, hopefully. Because it was in passing, and I didn't stop and give a clear, concise thought, and it got picked up and made into a headline that I was embarrassed about, and I am still embarrassed about it. I think all I wanted to say is generating alpha is hard, irregardless of everything I went through before. So you were right. I was wrong. I wanted to own up to that. I said it at the beginning, Bob, iron sharpens iron. And I knew that. And I have that long term attitude about this job. I'm not going anywhere. So, when I have a conflict, I want to settle it. Now, that said, I've got money managers that, have lost us money,
Yeah.
really messed up and lost us money. I don't call them, I won't talk to them. I remember walking down a hall early in my career here with a money manager, and I said, look, we invested in fund two. You're already on fund four. Go be successful. Forget us as a client. We're in fund two. You're one bad fund. We don't ever want to see you again. Go
Right.
make money somewhere else. I can do business with other people. And they were just like, no, no, we want the teacher. So I'm like, no, go get PERS, go get somebody else. Those people I won't, you know, call up and talk to and take the tough talk. But I respect you deeply. I respect NAIC deeply. I've known you guys most of my career. I always joke, if my wife knows the name of a money manager, that's usually not a really good thing. She knows the name Robert Greene, and I told her today, and she's like, "Good, it's good you're talking to him." And that's a positive to her. She gets it. So um, no, I think more CIOs need to be a little less thick-skinned and honest. You do get bumped on a lot of sides in this job, which is tough, and that maybe makes people thick-skinned. But I remember what you said to me. One of the reasons you called me was because I'll take the call,
Yeah.
and there are other states that just won't even talk to you. And I said, that's too bad.
Yeah.
You've got to have conversations. It's back to my analogy. If you really want to be good at what you do, you got to listen to the people who are going to criticize you as well as people who are going to pat you on the back. And I tell the board members, you've got 320 billion reasons to get pats on the back and be everybody's best friend. But, I got to say, I'm obviously rooting for the 49ers this weekend. And Brock Purdy has had a ton of people criticizing him, or better yet, Chase Young, who didn't run really hard on a play. I hope they listen to that, but then used it for a positive. And that's it is, the things you said to me were from your heart. I said
Mhm.
you have passion, and I really appreciate people who have passion and are coming from a right space, and I needed to hear that, and I took the lumps. And I consider us friends. I wanted to be on this, and I'm honored that you would let me participate in this, and I will continue to be involved and be there with NAIC if you need help after I retire. So I'm still going to stay in the business and be involved, and still try to push diversity. Again, I recognize this is not the face of diversity, and I can't change that, but if I can push and make it better for the future for my kids, and their grandkids, I love that.
Yeah.
I remember saying at NAA, sorry to mention a rival,
No
but
worries.
not a rival, but another group. when I look at my own family, my nephew Matthew Garcia,
Mhm,
my two grandsons, last name is Thompson, but they're half Latino. You would know that.
mhm.
And I think that's California, and I think that's what it's all about. Is it's not about last names, it's not about native language. It's about tapping into talent wherever you could find it. Lord knows there are probably some really brilliant investors in Mexico that don't ever get the chance to go to business school and college and then become investment people. But we need to find the talent wherever. Um, and that's why when I look at our staff, we need gender diversity, ethnic diversity, background diversity, age diversity, um, uh, sexual orientation diversity, the outlook on life. And if we're allowed to ask questions and then measure it, then that makes it more efficient. If we can't ask questions, then we're kind of poking around in the dark trying to get there.
Well, I only have two more questions for you, and we can wrap then. What's your outlook for the future, Chris? Where are we headed in terms of the asset management space? The challenges that you've talked about, the difficulty as these plans get larger and larger, and still have to find both alpha and yield. Where is this industry headed? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
A big sigh because I kind of too often look at the glass half empty. I'm worried about the future. I'll be very
Mhm,
honest. I'm worried, particularly first and foremost, about climate change. That we may not have a livable planet literally in 12, 13 years. Not
mm,
not not 2050. I'm talking about the early 2030s.
mhm,
I'm worried about the social stresses in our country. The gap between there's no middle class. The gap between lower income and the ultra wealthy is tearing our country apart. It happened way back when, but we came back together. So when I look at our industry, Bob, and I've been pretty vocal about fees. I am worried that the cost of alpha is far too expensive, and in many cases, the cost actually eats up all the alpha, so that the client, like us, the net return is just the beta of the market. And that's hard to say. I don't want to take money out of everybody's pocket and cut pay, but I think we really have to relook at what the cost of producing alpha is. Now, maybe with AI, it gets more efficient. I look at the number of analysts we had in the past doing research, and now with Bloomberg's and technology, you don't need as many people. But hopefully, we can get more efficient. I think the money management industry, when I look at the money, you said it. We were the second largest plan in the USA, but we're barely number 25 in the world. So a lot of the wealth in the world is outside the USA, has very different views and ethics, and their perspectives are very different. There are a lot of them are in emerging markets. That's going to be a challenge. And then I think that we probably have a coming wave where people are going to unitize um, mutual funds in fractional tokens, and in which case it opens the door for a lot of retail, which is great. But retail is definitely a mass that's harder to deal with. So hopefully there'll be some interesting changes in the future. The future should be bright for asset management because the wealth of the baby boom is going to be used a bit but passed down, and the wealth of the generation behind us is even bigger. But I really worry about the world and just being livable. What kind of investment if it's 120 in Phoenix for 3 months, and LA has, it had a 100-year storm. Some people say it had a 1,000-year storm last week. It's probably going to have those every winter, maybe for the whole winter. What's that world like, and how do we make a return in that kind of a world? So I think, it does get back to our mandates of climate change and diversity. And I think we definitely need to bring up the middle class and reestablish that in our country and around the world. And we need to solve climate change. Otherwise, that divide of haves and have nots will have to include things like clean air, water, livable environment. And that's going to be a clash around the world. So the more I hear, the more it's, I get kind of worried about the future for my grandkids, but you got to be optimistic. Mankind has created amazing innovations. Knock on wood. Hopefully they keep doing it. And long institutional money is the fund that needs to fund those innovations, and Wall Street and money management needs to invest in it. So that will be the catalyst for the future.
Well, Chris, we are at the end of our interview, and I did want to take a moment before giving you the final word, just to tell you what an honor it has been. I have throughout this interview tried to ignore the fact that you're retiring, and I haven't affirmed it or anything in the interview. But everybody knows by now you are retiring in June, and you and I have had days when we were in harmony and days when we weren't, but I always respected you, and I always
Thank you.
appreciated your commitment to honesty, and I always appreciated your desire to get to the right answer, whether it pleased a constituency or an advocacy group. That has to have its own sort of place. But I've appreciated working with you, Chris. I wish you and your family the very best, and I do thank you for your service. And especially thank you for your service to those who are often underserved and overlooked. So, on behalf of the NAIC and our board and our membership, thank you so much for your service, Chris.
Thank you, Bob. That means a lot to me. I really respect you, and I respect your leadership at the NAIC. So thank you very much. I am honored. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll let that be the last word. Again, Chris, thank you for this interview. All the best to our friends at CalSTRS, and we'll see you down the road. Take care.
All right. Take care. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Bye bye.